Hi, and welcome back to my channel where I'm going to cover the fighter's Psi Warrior class specialization from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass as well as explain and set up the various features gained. Of all of the classes I have covered thus far, this is the first that deals with Psionics, a power that I was first introduced to when I created a character for a Dark Sun campaign during the days of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Since then, it has seen little use, or at the very best, specialized use, but it is slowly seeing a resurgence in newer editions. Much like a monk trains physically to become one with their chi, psionicists train their mind to unlock the internal powers that they will then use to enhance their physical attacks, maybe even lift things with telekinetics, or even create barriers of force that can be used to block incoming attacks. Unlike other classes that deal with magic, psionicists are only loosely classified as magical, mainly because the magics themselves come from within the individual, even though they are pulling on the threads that make up part of the weave of magic. They do not call on a deity or use components to cast spells, but instead, they use their mind to form that power into whatever form they need it to be and project it to where they need it to have the effect that they want to have happen. As this particular class specialization is built off the fighter base class, many of the traits gained will be used to enhance those fighting skills, but there are still some nice features that give this class specialization some punch outside the simple enhancements to normal weapon attacks. I've already created a video that covers the base fighter class itself, and I'll provide a link to that in the description below. But a fighter is one of those classes that gets to select their class specialization at level 3, at which time they will unlock their first psionic capabilities. So let me go ahead and drop the fighter class into place so that we can choose Psi Warrior as our character and class specialization. The first feature your character is going to gain is called Psionic Power, and it's where your psionic capabilities come from and provides the basis for the rest of the psionic abilities your character gains later on. You will have to make use of something called a psionic energy dice, of which your character has a limited number of uses before they will need to complete a long rest to regain those uses. This does have one exception though. You will gain the ability to regain one spent energy die without having to complete a long rest by taking a bonus action to recoup, but you can only do this once before your character will require a short or long rest to regain that capability. The number of die your character will gain is equal to twice your character's proficiency bonus, meaning at this level, your character will have 4 energy dice. The die themselves are initially going to be die 6s, or 1d6s, which will increase over time, such that at fighter level 5, it will increase to a d8, at level 11, it will be a d10, and at fighter level 17, it will increase the final time to a d12. Finally, this feature is also going to give you your first 3 psionic powers that your character is going to be able to make use of. They are a protective field, Psionic Strike, and Telekinetic Movement, of which I will cover each of those in a moment. The first thing I want to do is set up the basic configuration for this feature. I will be doing something a little bit differently than I have in the past, such as with sorcery points, as these features will generally work the same way that a sorcery point does or Bardic Inspiration die. I want to try to set this up a little bit different to see if it makes a little bit more sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag and drop this into place and set this up under Psionic Power, because that's what it's going to be. I'm then going to modify the power group. So I just clicked on this little magnifying glass here. And what I want to do is set up our total number of uses. So instead of creating an individual dice tracker, if you will, that we would make use of here, I'm going to modify this to use twice our proficiency bonus. So we have a total of 4 uses. And is this short or long rest? Finish a short or long rest. So we just need to complete a rest in order to regain their uses. So the next thing I want to set up is the means to recover that single energy die during a combat situation as a bonus action. I'm going to drop this into place and create a new group called Psi Warrior. I'm then going to rename this to Psionic Power Recovery. And in a bracket, I'm going to put a B to indicate that this is a bonus action. I then am going to set up it's a once per rest scenario, meaning that you can use this once and then you have to complete a short or long rest in order to recover the ability to do this again. So that is now set up. And you can see right away that I have a psionic power in a psionic power group with 4 uses. Well, I'm going to modify that so that it deals with our protective field or one of these other things here in order to go ahead and deal with that. And the first psionic power we were going to look at is called Protective Field, which allows you to interject when an ally who is within 30 feet of your character has suffered some damage. You will be able to make use of a reaction and expend 1 energy die roll to reduce the amount of damage that ally will take. And the amount of damage that is reduced is equal to the value of your energy die roll plus your character's intelligence modifier. There are a couple of ways that we can go ahead and set up this effect. The first is to make use of a healing effect, if you will. So let me just set it up quickly as an example. It's not right, but I want to show why. So if we go ahead and add in a new effect here with the D6, and it's going to be plus your intelligence modifier, which is sadly a +1 for this character, then if you allow someone to take the damage and then you apply this healing to them, there's a problem. If they only suffered 3 points of damage, you've now healed them 4 points they didn't have before, and that's not how this feature works. So this effect is not right. I'm going to delete that effect. What we instead want to do is create an effect here that's going to work with the Dungeon Master prior to them rolling the damage. You're going to be reacting to it, so you need to be paying attention when somebody is hit. Execute the reaction, apply the effect to the character or creature that's attacking the ally you're interjecting and protecting. That way, this damage negates the amount of damage coming in, and if it happens to be more damage than what was originally received, meaning that you negated 7 points and they only suffered or would have suffered 6 points, then we want to be able to reduce the total incoming damage simply to 0, not to a negative number. And that's exactly how Fantasy Grounds works when you set this up right. First, we're going to modify the name of this power. It's going to be Protective Field, because that's the psionic power we're going to be making use of. I also want to be able to remind myself that this is a reaction, and it has a range of 30 feet. There's a couple of ways you can do it, but that's generally how I tend to like to set it up. And it's a recent change on my part. Next, I'm going to modify this, and I'm going to set up this. So I'm going to set up a name called Protective Field, and between field and DMG is a semicolon and a space. I'm then going to put DMG colon, and immediately after that, minus 1d6, and then immediately after that is a space, a square bracket, and inside of the square bracket, a minus, and then capital I, capital N, capital T, close square bracket. So we're telling it we also want to subtract the intelligence modifier. That's what we're doing here. It is going to expire on the next roll, and it will need to be dropped onto a target, and it doesn't have a duration. And that's exactly what we need. So let's see how this is actually going to work. Well, inside of a combat situation, let's say that this vampire has the active turn, and they're in the process of, I don't really have an ally here, so let's just temporarily set this dying ape as the ally. So just 1 second here. Let's first not make it dying. Fix up all of those. I'm going to change its faction to be allied, and I'm going to remove the unconscious effect, and I'll do that from all of them. Wink. And that one doesn't have it. Okay. So let's say that this vampire is attacking this ape. The vampire is going to make use of something that is called a radiant damage. No, that would be the damage against it. So I'm going to make I was trying to avoid something that does additional damage here. Anyway, I will use the radiant damage, although it's not going to be used appropriately here because it's supposed to be against the vampire, not against the target I'm attacking. So I'm going to target that and remove that. So right now I have the ape targeted when it comes to the vampire's action there. If I just simply do this, and again, this isn't the way this works, I'm simply doing this to showcase something. The amount of damage that I did was 20 points of damage, and that's because this is a flat point damage base. There's no roll that takes place here, and as we can see, we killed off the ape. Well, let me make it right again. If the fighter reacts and applies the effect to the vampire first, and then the vampire does the damage against the ape, you're going to see a dice roll that occurs here. That die rolled a 3. In addition to that, there was a total of -1 point that was reduced off the raw damage. So you can see that calculation here. The actual damage calculation is going to be -1d6 plus 19. Well, the raw damage is 20. The -1 that was added as part of this intelligence modifier, so if you look, you'll see that there's a -1 here, is matched against the constant that's here and automatically subtracted, so that the only thing it has to figure out from that point forward is the die roll, plus the additional math around that die roll. So whatever this value is, minus or plus the 19, and because this is a negative in front of this die roll, it's going to subtract a value from the 19, which in this case was a 3. So it rolled a -3. -3 plus 19 equals 16. Now, if I chose to do something that's a little less damaging, so that we can see a negation of the amount of damage here, I'm going to swap out this effect and put it onto, say, this ape here, and give that ape the action token. Because it does a lot less damage than a vampire does. So, I'm going to react and put this on that ape. I'm also going to have that ape attack the other ape. So, you're going to target that one. There we go. I'm now going to roll a 1d6 plus 3 bludgeoning damage roll. You'll see that the effect went away, but there was 2 1d6 die roll that actually occurred here. Well, what actually happened is the amount of damage that was done was 1 die of damage. There's still a +3 here, but we have a total subtraction of -4. It isn't even calculating the math requirement here. And that is because it doesn't need to. It's already reduced it to 0. So it's already doing the total amount of damage. We rolled a 3 on this die, and it's adding in the -1 to that value. So it behaves a little bit differently when you're not doing a quote-unquote static amount of damage versus a rolled dynamic amount of damage. It will lump the -1 into this calculation. So we had 1 minus 3 equals 0. Technically incorrect from a math perspective, but exactly what we want from an effects perspective. And that's exactly why we need to set this feature up this way as opposed to any other way. The next psionic ability is called Psionic Strike, and it allows you to do extra force damage using your psionic energy die whenever you make an attack. Once per turn, your character can expend 1 dice by rolling it and adding the value that shows up on that dice to the total amount of damage done. In addition to your intelligence modifier, this damage will be of the force damage type and is in addition to your actual weapon attack damage. To do this, the target must be within 30 feet of your character, and your attack must hit in order for the Psionic Strike to take effect. So what we're going to want to do is drag and drop this back into place again. I'm going to move it down, and then I'm going to rename this to be Psionic Strike. Now we've got that set up. We also want to indicate that it's a 30-foot range. Makes it nice and easy that I can see, I can only hit a target that's within 30 feet. Okay, that makes it easy. Now, this is where things get a little bit different. What we want to do is add a damage die roll here. So, I'm simply going to pop this open, create the effect. At this particular point in time, it's a 1d6. I'm going to drop that into place. And we get to add our intelligence modifier. Oops, I went right by it. I always do that. I don't know why. I should know not to do that by now. Damn it, did it again. Come on. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. And now we have this set up to do the damage. We don't need to do anything else. You might be wondering, wait a minute, why does this have 4 uses? Well, that's the effect that this power group is going to have. Now that we have 2 of these in here, they share these uses. So if I go ahead and use one of these, it will also use that for the other feature. That's why we set this up as a power group as opposed to individual features that have individual tracking dice. You can no longer, using this method, unintentionally overuse something if you aren't meant to overuse it. And the way this is going to work is as follows. Whenever you make an attack on a vampire, so let's go ahead and attack this vampire, and hopefully I hit. Yep, I did. You can then roll the damage and then simply click that to apply the force damage to the vampire. But there's also another way that you can do this, and it's going to be entirely up to you as to how you want to do it. We could have, instead of done it this way, we could have created an effect. And within that effect, we could go ahead and put in this information. So a name, Psionic Strike, semicolon, space DMG colon 1d6 space, and then in square brackets again, INT all in capital letters, space force. And I wanted to do it this way to showcase that this is possible to do. It will be on you and it will expire on the next roll. And the reason being is you're the one going to be doing this damage. So what you can do is simply click the effect, much like you had when you already hit the character, before you roll the damage, and then you will get both damage die roll that are going to occur here, and it will properly calculate out which damage the vampire was partially resisted to and which one it was not. So the total amount of damage it was resistant to was actually the 3 plus your strength modifier, which is 4, so a total of 7 points of damage. The amount of damage that the vampire was not resistant to is the 6 plus 1 points of force damage. So in this case, that would be 7. So, my brain just broke on the math. Anyway, that does work out to be 10 points of damage. And it gives you a nice convenient way to do this. So it's entirely up to you which of these two effects work. I like this, the actual effect one, simply because you now have context as to what math is happening within the actual chat log here, and you know why someone rolled a damage roll, because the name is there. See, it's there. You can see what exactly the effect was that did the extra points of damage. Now, the final psionic power your character is going to gain as soon as you choose this class specialization is called a telekinetic movement, and it has one little special bit to it. This allows you to make use of it in 2 different ways. The first is to expend what is essentially a free use by taking an action to move an object that is tiny, small, medium, or large, as well as a willing creature of the same size ranges to an area that is visible to you, and is 33 from where the creature or the object started. The starting point has to be within 30 feet of your character, and the destination must be unoccupied, but it can be further than 30 feet away from your character. You just need to be able to see it. If the object is tiny, it can start in your hand and can move 30 feet from that spot, so there's a little bit of an option there. When you're moving those creatures or objects, you will be able to move them along the vertical, the horizontal, or the diagonal if you combine the movements of your vertical and horizontal axes, so that your character can move them by lifting or lowering them at the same time, as well as pushing them and pulling them. This will expend your free use, and in order for you to do another free use, you will have to complete a long rest. However, you can also expend a psionic energy die to be able to use it again before you do that long rest to recover your uses. So you have 2 ways that you can use this. This means we need to have 2 ways that we go ahead and set it up. So the first thing I'm going to do, because we're not going to have an effect associated with this, we just need this for tracking purposes, I'm going to copy this into here and simply dump it into there. That's automatically going to give it a number of uses. So this one is called Telekinetic Movement. And it has a range of 30 feet. And it is an action, not a bonus action. So now we can track the number of uses in relation to this latter portion of the uses limiter, if you will, in the sense that you can now use it a total number of die that you have available. We also want to be able to use this as a unique effect or a one-use effect. Well, to do that, we need to move it out of this power group. I'm going to put this under a Psi Warrior group. And then I'm just going to make sure that we didn't stick the number of uses here. So that is correct. We want 1 use there, and we want to set this up for 1 daily use. Now we have set up both means of going through and being able to use this feature. We can use it for our 1 quote-unquote free daily use, and now if we want to use it again, we have to start burning our psionic die or our energy die in order to expend it. And that's everything we need to set up for our initial configuration of this character. So at level 5, we are going to have to do 1 adjustment. And that is because that's when we gain our first proficiency bonus increase, which means we need to increase our psionic's power uses limiter. And that's changing the number of uses from 4 to 6. Now we have an increase as to how many times we can make use of these features throughout the course of a short or a long rest period. There is, however, one other thing that I forgot about, and that is that we need to increase our psionic die from a 1d6 to 1d8. So we want to make sure that we are in our Actions tab and expand out both Protective Field and Psionic Strike, because that's where we're going to be making our changes. Each of these has to have the 1d6 modified to 1d8. I'm going to take care of the two effects first, because they're going to be relatively easy. And then if you did decide to keep this one here, as opposed to using this one, what you have to do is right-click on this die box, clear dice, and then drag the next die into it, in this case the 1d8, and that will increase the amount of damage. At fighter level 7, your character is going to gain access to the Telekinetic Adept feature, and it gives you new ways to make use of the psionic capabilities of your character. The first new option is called Psi-Powered Leap, and it allows your character to fly up to twice your character's normal movement speed until the end of the current turn. So that means, if your character has a movement speed of 30, you can fly up to 60 feet away. You have to end that turn on the ground. You cannot be hovering in the air, otherwise you could potentially suffer fall damage when your turn expires. This is a bonus action, and it is something that you can use once without having to expend an energy die, so we should set this up the same way that we set up telekinetic movement. So what I'm going to do is do just that. I'm going to quickly set this up, and I'm going to set up the psionic power one first. So I'm going to move this down into here. And for the flying thing, I'm just simply going to remove these effects. I don't need them, but I do need to be able to track this individually from one another, and I'm going to call this one Psi-Powered Leap. Okay, that sets that up. I'm then also going to set this up inside of our Psi Warrior group. And you may have noticed something there. I was able to take something that was locked into one group and drop it into another. When you modify things like this, you'll see that it has set itself as a spell, not as a feature. I don't like that it does that, but I like the side effect that it does do because of that. Now, I also need to remove the effects from here because we're setting up Psi-Powered Leap. We are not setting up anything else around it. Now, something else that you may have noticed is that we seem to be getting a bit of a pattern. You get to use this once before you can actually go through and use it again. So you use this as a bonus action. You can't do this again until you finish a short or a long rest. Well, what we want to do is ensure that we set this up as this one is a 1 rest, and this is 1 daily. I don't know why that went away. Might be when I drop the spell into place, it might have triggered an update there. But in effect, we now have everything set up there. Now I need to recover the one that is, there we go. There, now we have both. The second new capability is the Telekinetic Thrust, and it gives your character a means to attempt to knock a target prone or push them 10 feet away when you make use of the Psionic Strike option. Your character will force a strength-based saving throw against the target your Psionic Strike successfully hit, and if that creature fails the saving throw, it will knock that creature prone, or you will push them back 10 feet, depending on which one you chose. Very useful if they happen to be near the edge of a cliff, for example, or very high precipice. You could theoretically execute the push attempt, and if they fail, you can just shove them off the cliff. This option is going to be linked to your Psionic Strike, and it does not work independent of that. Thus, this feature will have to remain separate from the Psionic Dice group, but it should be grouped into with the overall Psionics group. And that is primarily because there is nothing here that we have to track. So I'm going to quickly drop this into, not this one. I'm going to quickly drop this into here. I'm going to move this down into that group. Now, everything here is pretty much set up for us. The only thing we're going to want to adjust is this. Here's the thing. It's a strength-based saving throw against your intelligence modifier. So I'm going to very quickly set up this power group to ensure that our saving throws work off of intelligence. And I keep going by that. There we go. Now this is going to calculate the saving throw required automatically for us. We also don't have a usage limitation because it's linked to how many of these we have. So if you do decide to use this effect, what you will do is this. Inside of a combat situation, let's say this vampire, actually let's go with one of these apes because the vampire can fly, under the right circumstances anyway. This ape is near a cliff. I'm going to try to push them when I execute the Psionic Strike. So I decide to make use of Psionic Strike. I apply the damage effect to my character, and let's say I've already hit that ape, so let me target that ape and untarget you. Now I roll my damage. Okay, so they're heavily damaged. Here's where Telekinetic Adept can come into place. You can now chain that because you used Psionic Strike. You can chain this particular requirement where they make a saving throw. They failed. Well, if they're 5 feet away from a cliff, you've now just pushed them off because you can push them back 10 feet. Your other option is simply to knock them prone. Well, from a tactical perspective, if I can take somebody completely out of the fight entirely, I will. I'll knock them off the cliff. I won't knock them prone. But if you chose to knock them prone, you would simply hit the prone effect, and there it goes. If, however, the ape was pushed completely off the cliff, they're dead. There's nothing really they can do if the cliff is high enough to kill them. Although some DMs will make a few secret rolls to see if, when they were pushed away, if they were in close enough proximity to the side of the cliff that they could grab onto something on the way down. They might still suffer some damage, but they theoretically could recover from that fall. And let's move on to the next change that we're going to have to make. And this will have to happen at level 9. And that's going to require us to adjust our psionic power again from a total number of 6 die, because our proficiency bonus is increased, to a total number of 8. At fighter level 10, your character is going to gain the Guarded Mind feature, and it gives your character a passive resistance to psychic damage and an active means to remove some charm or frightened effect from your character. So the resistance effect is relatively straightforward to set up. We do want this as part of our Psi group though. It is not linked to our psionic die, except for if you expend that part. So Guarded Mind, for removing the resistance or applying the resistance here, we want to make use of the feature natively. I'm going to add a new effect, and it's going to be called Guarded Mind. Semicolon, resist, oops, not resost, resist, and then it is psychic damage, so PSYCHIC. Now what that sets that up for is use of any incoming resistance, any incoming psychic damage will have a resistance applied to your character. So if you suffer some form of psychic damage, you only take half of the damage. It's a permanent effect. It doesn't go away. This means we don't have a duration and we don't have an expenditure here. So it can stick around exactly like that. Now, the part that we do have to do, though, is Guarded Mind also has to be dragged into this. So let me pop that open. There we go. Apparently it doesn't like it when you just simply drag and drop. And the reason for that is in order for you to remove the charmed effect, you need to expend a dice to do so. So we actually can get rid of this effect. Sorry, I don't want to add an action. I want to remove that action. Because all we're going to be doing is say, hey, DM, I'm using a die to remove the charm effect that's on my character. Or the frightened effect. That's it. You don't have to roll against it, nothing. You just simply use one of your energy die, and away it goes. So to showcase the resistance of Guarded Mind against the psychic damage, I have temporarily added a Mind Flayer to our combat tracker here. I've applied the psychic damage resistance effect here, and I am simply going to apply, where is it here? Works better if I can see the Mind Flayer's damage. There we go. I'm going to drag and drop this roll onto our fighter. And we can see here that total amount of damage rolled was 18, but it was partially resisted. At fighter level 11, we once again need to increase the die value of our energy die. So, we want to expand out Protective Field and Psionic Strike, as those are the only two features that we have at this point that make use of the die directly as a roll. And we just simply want to modify the effects to once again increase the die. And I don't know why these were at 1d6. That is a little weird. But anyway, I'm going to delete this. Drop that into place, as well as modify this to be 1d10. And that is the change that we have to make for level 11. At level 13, we then need to look at increasing the total number of psychic die that we have available to us. So our proficiency bonus has gone up to 5, which means we now have 10 points that we can make use of when it comes to this power group. So I'm going to modify that and increase that to 10. And at fighter level 15, your character is finally going to gain the Bulwark of Force feature, which allows you to choose a number of creatures equal to your intelligence modifier, which can include your own character, and generate a telekinetic barrier of protection around them. Now, unfortunately for anyone who happens to be in the same party as this fighter, their intelligence modifier is 1. So if they're a bit of a selfish character, they're going to try to probably protect themselves, not anybody else in the party. But this is another one of those features that we do get a free use of before we can start expending psionic energy die. So I'm going to drop this into here and move this down into the Psi Warrior. And we will need to complete a long rest in order to be able to make use of it again. So I'm going to flip that over to prep. This is 1 daily use. And did I set that up for guarded mind? Nope, because it's not required. So we don't need to. And that is Bulwark Force for that. So let's take a look at it from a psionic power perspective. All we do is drag and drop that into the psionic power group. There we go. Now we need to go ahead and set up the effects for it. And that's to deal with the actual, oops, I closed that for some reason. To deal with the limiter here. What we want to do is apply this half cover effect to our characters. So I'm going to create a new effect. I'm then going to copy and paste this into place because I already had it created earlier in my notes. So Bulwark of Force, semicolon, cover, colon, range. And the reason we want range here is because 99.99% of the time, if you're in melee-related combat, you're not going to be in cover in relation to that combat. There's the odd chance that you will, but for the most part, it's just going to be against ranged effects. And it will last for 1 minute, and it can go on yourself or a target. I'm also going to do the same thing for this version of the power. Copy that in place. Pop this open, set that for 1 minute. Now, if I go into a combat situation, I'm going to remove all of my previous test effects. So, I need to find a ranged attack. It has to be ranged, not range. So, there we go. And there we go. Now, if I apply the effect to the character, I should be able to roll a 17, and let's see what that does. Well, hopefully roll a 17. So I need to roll a 12 on the die in order for, yeah, see, now we're seeing the defense effects toggle here. That's what was missing. So this is definitely coming into place. Excellent. That confirms to me that it is in fact working. Now, if this particular warrior had a +2 or +3 or whatever for an intelligence modifier, they'd be able to protect themselves as well as any of the other allies that they have on the field up to that number. And you would apply this effect to all of those characters. You just simply drag and drop it into place. That will automatically stick around based on the duration that was set within the effect itself, which is 1 minute. So if we advance combat around for a number of durations, we should see after about 10 of them, the cover effect drops off. I think we're at 9. There we go. So the effect went away. So at level 17, we're going to want to make our final adjustment when it comes to the total number of dice that we have, or energy die that we have, if you will. Oops, I don't need to adjust that. I need to adjust that here from 10 to 12. And that's because our proficiency bonus increases for the last time to +6. We also want to make the last adjustment that we have to do when it comes to our energy die value. So once again, we still only have to worry about Protective Field and Psionic Strike. So I'm going to increase this to a 1d12 there. Change this out to a 1d12 here. And make the final adjustment in this one as well. And that sets everything up for Psionic Power for our final level. Additionally, At fighter level 17, your character will gain access to the Telekinetic Master feature, which now unlocks the ability for you to cast the Telekinesis spell without the need of components, using your intelligence for the spellcasting capability. This means that when a target is forced into making a strength-based saving throw to resist your telekinetic attempts, they would be going against 8 plus your character's intelligence modifier plus your character's proficiency bonus. This is another feature, however, that you can use once before you will need a long rest in order to recover those uses or begin the process of expending psionic dice to continue using it. Now, this one's a little bit different to set up. Some people will drag this telekinesis spell into place. I will actually simply, in this case, drag the Telekinetic Master effect into place and set it up. Oops, not that one. That one. And set it up for its daily uses. And it's a long rest, yeah. So 1 daily use. I will then add it to the Psionics power group so that it can also be used there as part of the process of expending your Psionics energy die. There is no effect that we would apply here. The effect is going to come from the spell. And again, it's an effect that 9 times out of 10 you're probably going to be dealing with in relation to the DM applying whatever result you have decided upon. So there isn't anything that we have to do from an effects perspective specific to that feature. And it really does bring us to the conclusion of setting up this particular class specialization. This is definitely a different take on the fighter class, but it does answer some of my questions of a couple of characters in a few novels that I've read and what they were able to do and why they were able to do it. I know that my own personal experience with psionics in older editions of D&D has soured me slightly to these kinds of classes. I still feel they have a lot of potential to be really good and enjoyable, but I don't think I'm ready to just try that yet myself. I do, however, encourage others to give this a try and see for themselves, as my opinion is just that. It's not meant to set the minds of others in relation to this class, but instead simply to inform you about my personal experience with it. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.